Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. I'm at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. We're here for our second annual MBA Summit. Let me explain what that means. We're going to have 3 one-hour panels, one after each other. We're going to start with the gatekeepers of 3 incredible MBA programs. Then we're going to go into an alumni session, really, of students who can talk about why tech, finance, and consulting are hungry for MBAs. And then finally, we're going to talk about the MBA and its impact beyond business. So join us for all 3. Each one will be live streamed and will also appear on Poets and Quants later on in terms of edited transcripts and videos. But first, let me go to our gatekeepers. To my immediate left, we have SOOJIN, who is the gatekeeper and the custodian of the MBA program, really, at Michigan Ross. Right next to her, we have Luke PENA, who is the head of admissions and financial aid at Dartmouth College's Tuck School of Business. And then we have rejoining us from our last year's panel, because she was so good, Morgan Byrnstein, who heads up MBA admissions at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so a lot of people are wondering, in this day and age, with the economy going well and the price tag on MBA programs quite high, is it really worth it? Now, all of you have MBAs yourself, and all of you are in the position to say yes, no, or wait list a lot of people. I'm imagining that it's within your self-interest to say, yes, it's well worth it, but prove it to me.
Okay, can I start?
Absolutely.
All right. Absolutely, it's worth it. Here's why. If you want to expand your career opportunities, there is no other degree that will expand it the way an MBA can. You're going to gain 4 key things. One is you'll gain knowledge about business. 2, you'll gain skills that you won't on the job. You'll get practice interviewing, searching for a job that you won't be able to do if you're in real life. And then 4 is access to a great network of other people with MBAs and within your university. So 4 great reasons to get an MBA. I don't think it's bad for anybody.
90 plus employment rates help, plus 6-figure salaries. Luke, you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I agree with all of those merits of the MBA program, but I would say it's not worth it for everybody. I think you have to really think about the costs and the benefits for yourself. So I think the MBA might not be worth it for somebody who's only oriented in the short term, because this is a real investment in the long term and the rewards that come long after you've graduated from the program. I think it might not be worth it for somebody who is only focused on the costs, because there is a big upfront cost. There is an investment to this. But I also think, finally, it might not be worth it for anybody who isn't ready to fully commit and immerse to this experience and to really reap all of those rewards that you were talking about. You have to not go halfway. You have to be prepared to fully engage, fully immerse, and fully take advantage of all of the resources. And if you're not yet prepared to do that, I would say you might wait until you really are ready to commit all the way in the ways that we hope you would and that you would want to get the maximum value out of the experience.
Yeah, this is not a box you check off on your resume.
Yeah. I think you raise a valid point there, which is that so oftentimes candidates think about the ROI in terms of, my salary before, my salary after, and the investment that I'm going to make in the education, which of course is important and one way to think about ROI. But I think you raise sort of the concept of being able to go all in. And in order to do that, or to get the most out of that, right, you really need to think about the other rewards of business school, right? How you grow personally, what you learn about yourself, the self-confidence that you're able to build. Some of those things that can't necessarily be measured in an Excel spreadsheet.
That's really true. And way too often, people merely look at the starting salary numbers and then they make a calculation. And that's the least of it. That's always the least of it. So if you do decide that you want to pursue an MBA, how do you know which one is right for you? Now, all 3 of you are competing with each other. I want to tell the audience, and this is kind of fun, Morgan just won 2. 2 people who were admitted to one to Tuck and also Haas, and then one that Ross and Haas. California and that weather is one of the things, but geography is a consideration for a lot of people. How do you make the right choice for you? SOOJIN.
If I were doing it all over again, I would talk to as many students and alumni from the schools that I'm considering as possible, because they're the ones who are really going to be able to give you perspective on what is that experience going to be like for you. And the more recent alums and the current students are going to be the best resource for you. And most schools, certainly we do, have on our website student ambassadors that you can connect with, and you can filter by backgrounds and career goals and where you're from. And so you can find someone who is similar to you and then get their perspective if that's of interest. But really talking to people is the most valuable way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And of course, a campus visit can be helpful too, right?
Yeah, I think what, SOOJIN was touching a lot on fit
Yeah.
with a program. And again, I think as with there being many different ways to evaluate ROI, there are many different ways to define and evaluate fit. And I think one of those is certainly coming to campus. To the extent that you can't do that before you submit your application, you can always do that later on in the process, certainly before you make a commitment to one of the schools. But there are a number of ways to learn about the program virtually, whether that's through virtual chats, fairs, connecting with students via email or phone
Right.
as well.
I was just talking with one of our MBA ones actually before this to say, what do you wish you had done differently? And one of them said, in fact, I wish I would have reached out to students earlier, because then I would have had a better sense for which schools were really worth investing my time in applying to.
I think some candidates hesitate to reach out to current students or recent alumni, feeling that they are imposing upon their time. But really, especially current students, love telling stories about their own MBA experience. So I think it's certainly important to be mindful of the time that you are taking from them and to prepare for that outreach with thoughtful questions and already having done a little bit of research about the program. But again, students are always more than happy to share their own personal stories.
You could also tell a lot about how enthused they are. I mean, what kind of passion do they show when they describe their experience in a particular MBA program and what really mattered to them? Now, Luke, you have an interesting perspective on this, because on some level you believe that total comfort, which could be defined as fit, may not be the ideal situation that you're looking for, because you want to get out of your comfort zone to learn the most about business. What's your take on this thing?
Yeah, fit is such an interesting concept and an interesting word. I'll never forget sitting with a student in Shanghai, and he said, tell me about why I should pursue an MBA, and don't use the words fit, holistic, or authentic. He said, because I've heard these words over and over and over, and it's true. We talk about fit a lot. And I do think that fit is a concept that does in some ways invoke the idea of being completely in your comfort zone. And I actually think that's not the greatest value of the MBA experience. There actually is some value in, yes, feeling like you do have an ability to feel safe and secure, but at the same time, push beyond the boundaries of what you've already seen and what you've experienced. And when you can do that, and when you can balance that support and that challenge, that's a powerful place to grow, both with the support and the challenge around you. So I think that does play a huge experience in the way that you might think about the MBA program. Yeah.
I find that most MBA students are incredibly supportive of each other. They're very generous with the experiences that they've had. If you've been in finance and you don't know a whole lot about how to read an income statement or a balance sheet, you'll get that from a finance student. If you have a poet in your class who's exceptionally good at communicating, you'll tend to get a lot of help from that person and you're on your team. So in the academic work, particularly in the core, is pretty demanding and rigorous, where you're going to get stretched. You're going to feel a little uncomfortable, I think, no matter where you are or how supportive the culture is. So, so fit, I think fit is a gut kind of thing too, right? You have to feel it in your heart, and I think you can't feel it in the heart unless you do what you suggested. Talk to a lot of alumni about your experience, visit the campus, get into the cafeteria and sit and talk with people, sample a class and see what level of participation and how prepared the students are, and get a real feel for what that experience is going to be for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. See how students interact with each other, how they pass each other in the halls, whether they're willing to stop and talk with you.
Yeah.
But let me add one more, because I know there's a lot of cost in thinking about visiting a campus and even reaching out to students. There is a lot of value in that. I don't discount the value. And yet I think about the fairness and equity for all of you who might be thinking about an MBA program. And so there's a little hack that I sometimes give. If you can't visit the campus and if you don't have access to students or alums, look at the school's essay questions and just write out some thoughts. You don't have to write the whole essay, but schools are very deliberate about the questions that we ask our candidates. And so if you just write some thoughts and see what comes up and which are the questions that excite you to answer, that's coming back to, John, what you said about the gut feeling.
Yeah.
You can see, does that excite you to really dive into that topic? And that's a different message for yourself than if you're not finding the same enthusiasm in answering a question. And that can be a very telling sign.
Now, last year, SOOJIN, you used the metaphor of dating to sort of describe how to find an MBA program. It's kind of like dating, but is it like Tinder or Match.com?
I'm partial to Match. That's how I met my husband. But you have to go out on a lot of dates. You have to give schools a chance, even the ones that you might think, I should rule those schools out because I don't think they're my school because of the location or the size or whatnot. You really have to take it for a test drive because you may find that it feels smaller than it is or it feels bigger than it is. So you really need to give every school a chance before ruling them out, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dating metaphor is almost too apt because in some ways it invokes also the idea of two parties trying to impress each other and put their best foot forward. And I would say the best kind of dating experiences may actually go beyond that, where you can actually just be comfortable in presenting yourself as you are.
Yeah.
And that may be, to continue the analogy, a really thoughtful way to think about approaching schools is if you feel like you have to present a version of yourself that's not you, that might actually not be the right place for you. And yet if you feel like you're very comfortable and have that support to be able to say, okay, this is who I am and I can engage the school in a very natural way, that's a very telling sign in terms of finding a place that you might be aligned.
Yeah. Now, every admissions director says that they look at applications in a holistic way.
Luke's favorite word.
Right? Okay. So, but do you actually apply some sort of weight to one metric over another, one criteria over another? You know that there's an obsession with standardized test scores. And people fret about them like they fret about nothing else in terms of the application, right? Sure, you might get really nervous when you do an interview, but at that point, at most schools, Tuck interviews everybody if they can come to Hanover, New Hampshire. You've actually made a big cut and you're right on the cusp of acceptance. But do you weight these different aspects? And if you do, how important is the GMAT or the GRE? Morgan?
Yeah, well, I think this is a great question to raise because I think this is one of those opportunities that we have to bust some of these myths about the admissions process.
Indeed.
You know, I think inherently your question or the concern that sometimes surfaces from candidates is that every element of the application is assigned a weight. GMAT 20%, essay 10%, you know, recommendations 10%, and I hesitate to even throw those random numbers out there for fear that somebody might actually take those literally. So I just made those up. You know, I think that the quick answer is I would say that most schools are not employing any sort of a formula or weighting to the admissions criteria. I think if it was that simple, we would all be out of a job because you could simply put those inputs into that formula and spit out an admissions decision.
That's true.
You know, I think part of the reason why we are all in these roles and why we have our teams who are so passionate about what they do is the opportunity to really get to know a candidate individually, right? And getting to know somebody individually, their strengths, their opportunities for growth, the obstacles that they've overcome really requires us to dig into every single application and treat it as if we are trying to get to know the human being behind the piece of paper, the applicant behind the application. And I think the next question that oftentimes surfaces is, you know, well, if my GMAT's low, or my GPA is low, or I don't have enough work experience, how do I make up for that? Or is it a done deal? And again, I think really in our effort to get to know candidates individually, no, it's never a done deal. I think there's an opportunity if you're weaker in one component of the application to shine elsewhere.
Right. Is there such a thing as a perfect application?
No. They're all great. If they're telling their story and they're putting their best foot forward, that's who they are, and that's really what we want to know. Who are you? What will you bring to the community, to the learning experience? And so that's, in my mind, the best application. Not one that's been manufactured by somebody else, not one that overreaches who you are. You really need to find the place that's the right fit for you, and you can only find the right fit if you're being authentic with who you are.
And to a large extent, you're trying to evaluate potential, right? Because you're bringing in raw talent on some level, and the idea of an MBA program is to transform that individual and the talents that he or she has, but yet past can also reflect on what that potential is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. Not only are there not perfect applications, there are not perfect applicants. And I will often tell candidates, half jokingly but half serious, if you're already perfect, the MBA is not worth it for you. Don't come to the MBA. The point of this is to grow. And so if you believe that you're already perfect, either you're not self-aware and you're not going to be a good applicant, or maybe you are already perfect and go save the world now. But we want to see exactly as you said, that a candidate is understanding both their areas of strength and their areas to grow. And that's where the potential piece really comes in. That candidates can understand, okay, this is what I will show you to suggest and predict that I will be able to continue to have impact going forward. So a one-size-fits-all approach to the application, like Morgan said, assigning weights that would be fixed all across the board would be a real disservice to the heterogeneity of the richness of the pool. And we see people spike in different areas, we see people show potential in different areas, and we see different people have areas of growth. And we need to be responsive and reflexive to that as we're looking at applications.
I think this is one of the common pitfalls that candidates make as they start the application process is, inevitably I think you're going to start with a laundry list of all of your achievements, your awards, your accolades, et cetera, and that is where a lot of candidates anchor the rest of their application. But as Luke noted, a lot of what we're looking for are the imperfections. The times when you have faltered, when you have failed, and how you have recovered, how you reacted to that. I think as I reflect back on some of the strongest applications I've read, it's not the perfect application, right? It's the ones where somebody was willing to show a little bit of vulnerability and then help us understand how they reacted to that. Because inevitably, right, business school is going to be a really challenging time. It is hopefully going to push you outside of your comfort zone. And so it helps the admissions committee to understand how you're going to respond to those sorts of situations, whether that's not getting your top job, or maybe it's a challenge you're having in communication with your study team, or running for a leadership role that you ultimately don't get. How do you react to that? And I think that's very telling about the character and about the potential.
Do you have to triumph over a failure that you're willing to admit in an application for it to be successful? In other words, can you be too vulnerable, too honest, that you can damage yourself in the application process? What do you say?
Yeah, you're giving me the look, John, so I think this one's coming for me. I know we talk a lot about the idea of confident humility.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you will tackle situations, difficult moments, with both confidence about what you might be able to achieve, but also some humility in terms of knowing what you don't know. And so my mind goes there. I don't think that the outcomes always have to be successful on a superficial level, but I think there needs to be reflection and learning. And so if somebody shares a failure in the application and it is an opportunity to really learn, to grow, to reflect, to think about, this is what I knew about myself, this is how I might be able to grow in a better way going forward, that's really powerful. And if we're seeing something less than that, well then it's just a failed outcome without a learning and an opportunity for growth, and that's less compelling.
Right.
I think it goes back to your question of the perfect application. And if someone tries to present themselves as, I've had no failures, then we wonder, are they really self-aware? Are they really sharing the whole story? And we want candidates who are going to be self-aware and who are going to be able to learn from, as Luke said, their challenges and own them.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible to come off as too scripted, too rehearsed, basically too slick, which is a real turnoff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, work experience. Good MBA programs generally look for 3 to 5 years of work experience. Is there a kind of work experience that you're really looking for? You can be a mere cog in the wheel, I suppose, in some cases, or you can be leading a team, and maybe that leadership experience is more valuable to you in terms of getting into a really good school. What do you look for? Is there something special in work experience that's important for you when you assess a candidate?
If you looked at the backgrounds of the students who are in our programs, you would be astounded by the range and the diversity of what students today in an MBA program are doing. all of us probably have former professional athletes, musicians, teachers, Peace Corps volunteers, you name it. It's not just business backgrounds. And so it's less about what kind of work you did, but what did you learn? What skills will you bring? How well did you do in what you were doing in your prior life? How will you help the learning of your classmates by virtue of what you've done? So there is no standard background that we're looking for. And we love reading about the diversity of backgrounds.
Yeah, John, you were saying last night how many interesting, compelling people you've met over your career who come through with the MBA degree, and I couldn't agree more. And agreeing with SOOJIN, you just see an incredible range of experiences and backgrounds. That's one of the reasons why I love working with the MBA program so much, is you meet people who aspire to lead all across different industries. And I think that's fundamental. Leadership is a concept that is necessary and applicable in every single effort, in every single discipline. And so I will just add to what SOOJIN said, that we do care about the outcomes. Right? We care about what you as a candidate have achieved, and yet I would venture to say we care even more about the behaviors that led to those outcomes. So it's not enough to have been successful within the context of your work. You also need to have earned those results in the right way and shown the kind of behaviors that suggest that you will continue to be successful and build on the potential that you show.
Right.
Because you don't transfer your outcomes to business school, but you do transfer your behaviors. And those are what predict that you will continue to be successful with greater positions of responsibility.
Right.
And I would just add, I mean, I think these are all excellent points about what we in admissions are looking for in terms of diverse backgrounds and industries. And I think that more and more employers as well. So as you think about what your path is going to look like post-MBA, employers are looking to build out a diverse, staff, diversity, including thinking about diversity of industry and experience before coming into those post-MBA roles. So.
Right, and that's a key learning of any business school, the fact that you're going to be in a room with people from dramatically different places, and in crafting your classes, you're specifically looking for certain types of people, right? And maybe the commonality is the potential and their willingness to contribute and give parts of themselves to others. So you all have a lot of applicants, okay? If you look at the acceptance rates of your schools, the odds are significantly against a person getting admitted and then enrolling. So, and there are pools of candidates, obviously, that are clearly overrepresented. The most classic case is, a software-trained engineer in India. But there are other overrepresented pools as well. How do you stand out among all the pile of applications that you gotta go through? What can make a difference? I mean, if I'm a consultant and you're overloaded with consultants, or I'm an investment banker and you have too many of them or too many engineers, how do I raise my hand and say, hey, look at me, give me a shot?
I think as long as you're telling your story, no two people are going to have had the same experience. Even if you're in the same firm, you've worked on the same project, even if you've had the same roles, your impact is likely to be different. What you've learned about yourself is likely to be different. What you want to do is likely to be different. So everyone has a unique story. The danger comes in trying to look like the quintessential MBA applicant and thinking, well, I have to have this background and say I'm going to do this. It's really not about that. It's telling your unique story. And if you give your story to someone else to read, can they identify it as uniquely you, or does it sound like everybody else? So getting that kind of litmus test is also a way that applicants can differentiate themselves.
And that comes from introspection, right? I mean, you find your uniqueness by thinking about who you really are, where you came from, and what you've done. And without that introspection, I don't think you can probably do a good application. Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just building on what SOOJIN was saying here, I think that another really important component is trying to make that human connection, right? If we get back to sort of this analogy that choosing a business school is like dating or, courtship or a relationship, a lot of what allows for that relationship to blossom is making that human connection and feeling like you really see that person. Now, I acknowledge that it's difficult to make a human connection via an application, but I think one of the things that I always encourage applicants to do is to recognize that there is a real live human being on the other side of that application who's reading it, right? It's not like you're just submitting it into, some computer that's going to read it and score it. We're real people. We have a staff of real people, and that is what we're trying to do in that process, is to connect. And I think that, for our programs and for most others, there are multiple people who are going to be reading the application. And the reason for that is that we recognize that we're all coming in with potentially different biases or different perceptions or different ways of establishing connection. And so when you have multiple people who are going to be evaluating it, it increases the opportunity for a candidate to stand out.
Aren't there counterintuitive things that often allow someone in an oversubscribed pool to stand out? In other words, the engineer who plays the cello in orchestra, or the investment banker who's a ballet dancer. That makes it for a very different kind of candidate, and you wonder, okay, well, how did this happen? And maybe this person has something a little bit more than the engineer who is a member of the software club. You look for that?
Yeah, it can be compelling, but I worry that sometimes we encourage people to go out and pad a resume with things that may not be their true interests, just to look interesting and eclectic.
Right.
And I think that's wrongheaded.
I think a lot of admission consultants would advise that.
Yeah, I truly think the best way to stand out is not to try, which sounds paradoxical and counterintuitive, but it has shades of what SOOJIN was saying a moment ago, right? You have to be comfortable with saying, this is who I am, and these are my strengths, and these are the areas I have to grow. I think we might all agree, after reading thousands, tens of thousands of applications over the years, you can tell when somebody is really trying hard to impress and putting up a facade. And that's not a compelling candidate, because that's not what makes for a successful business school experience. You're not going to business school to show off for all of your classmates, or at least you shouldn't be. You're going there to learn and to grow. And so you have to be willing to share those things. So I know when I read an application, the candidates that stand out the most are the ones where I finish an application and I say, I really know who this person is.
That human
To your
connection,
point,
right?
I can picture what they'll be like in the class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the ones that I struggle with the most are the ones where I read the whole application and I say, I have no better idea who this person is than when I started. None at all. And so I think it matters less what are the interesting, neat things on the resume, and more, can you convey yourself? So to your point, the guidance I often give candidates when they're putting together the applications, particularly essays, things like that, give it to people who have some sense of who you are and ask the question, is this me? Not is this a good business school essay, not is this a good MBA application, but does this capture the essence of me? And if the answer is no, you still have work to do. If the answer is yes, you've done good work.
I read in that answer sort of the need for a delicate balance between listing in a laundry list kind of way your achievements, which you don't want to do, or being so vague in how you describe yourself that you don't really get a full picture of who the person is.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, and what I wanted to build on what you were saying is that I do think that sometimes candidates feel the pressure to come in and put out that laundry list of activities to pad their resume with things. But we notice, oh look, they just started this a year ago, right? Or this was just something that was started this past summer right after they took the GMAT. I think in terms of engagement, we're looking for more sustained activities over a longer period of time. But I also want to add that we recognize that perhaps not everybody had access to the same opportunities to dive into these extracurriculars. Maybe they had other family commitments or financial constraints. And so we want to take that into account as well. The other thing that I would add that you were just mentioning, Luke, is that I think that oftentimes when candidates approach the application, they look at it as one component at a time. Let me do my resume, let me do my essays, let me fill out the application form. And I think really those are the applications that tend to fall flat, the ones that where we say, I'm not really sure what I just learned about this person. I think the critical thing that some candidates miss is looking at it collectively, right? Thinking of each of those components as one piece of this pie, and taking a step back and saying, all right, well, how is what I've outlined on my resume reiterated or confirmed in my essay? And how does some of the attributes that my recommender is going to call out, how am I also surfacing that in my application? So that way there's some consistencies and there's overlap, right? Because we're not going to be able to remember 20 different things about every single candidate. Maybe we'll remember 2 or 3 at most. And so figuring out what are those 2 or 3 things that you want the admissions officers to remember and making sure that they're repeated throughout your application.
So it's kind of connecting the dots. And when the
Exactly.
dots don't connect, it raises questions, maybe red flags. What are the red flags that you, you look out for in an application?
Well, I think a lot of applicants focus on the outlines of who they are, hitting the right score, being in the range of the GPA, having the average years of work experience. Things that we'd see on a spreadsheet are what I would call kind of the outlines of who somebody is. We're really more interested in what's on the inside. That comes through in the rec letter, in your essays, and then in the interview. What will you bring to the table? What do you know about yourself? I know we're repeating this quite often, but I really hope that applicants will take away that it's not just about the scores and the quantitative stuff.
Right. What are your red flags, Luke?
I'm always cautious on this question. I think of the psychology of the application. You think about a top trained musician, and that musician doesn't sit down to play a performance in Carnegie Hall or wherever and think about all the mistakes she or he might make. Right? And an athlete doesn't get ready to go take the sports floor or the court and say, I wonder if I'm going to miss this shot or if I'm going to miss this block or whatever it may be. And so I think about the psychology of approaching this with positivity. And I sometimes worry that if we talk about don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that,
A good point.
then we're putting our applicants in the mindset of, well, I've got to watch out for all these landmines. Right? And I step here and like there goes my application. I step here. And so trying to bring us back to a place where we think about approaching this with positivity. I think we've talked a lot, and I do agree with what SOOJIN's already said, but I do think we talk a lot, and I don't know that our applicants need more motivation to say don't do this, because I think a lot of the dialogue focuses on that. And so I'm dodging the question a little bit, but I acknowledge that I want all of our applicants to approach the application with lots of confidence and lots of positivity about I have this great opportunity to showcase who I am. And so I end up trying to steer clear of dwelling too much on the red flags, and I hope all our applicants do too.
No, that's fair.
I'll give you a red flag.
Okay, great.
But I'll reframe it as perhaps a tip. Okay,
Right.
you know, and I think
Beautiful.
that, and I'm just thinking about what are some of the common things that surface, and this is a very specific one, but I think a very real one. One of the things that SOOJIN talked about earlier was self-awareness in candidates, and I think one of the areas where sometimes we see the self-awareness or judgment come into question, maybe, for example, when a candidate says something like, if the admissions committee feels this is important for me to do, please let me know and I will go do it. And this most commonly surfaces, admittedly, I think candidates are concerned about showing quantitative readiness, achieving a certain GMAT score or quant subscore, and may write in an optional essay, if the admissions committee feels that I should retake the GMAT, please let me know and I will do it. And so I think that's one of those times where we would hope that a candidate would have that self-awareness to know, to have done some research, to have done some reflection, and say, maybe I'm not quite at the level where I need to be my most competitive or to put my best foot forward, and I should go and do this on my own. I think that is, and to the point of this, the concept of red flags and landmines, I don't think that somebody doing that would necessarily, discard that application into the deny pile, but it would give pause, I think, in terms of judgment and self-awareness. That's one specific example, but we might think, well, how could this apply to how they approach decision-making in their study teams, for example?
Yeah, good point. Okay, question you've heard over and over again, but still people are obsessed with it. GMAT or GRE, does it really matter at this stage of the game? SOOJIN?
No, I think most schools these days accept both.
Right.
And they're not looked at any differently. What the advice I would give candidates is take practice tests of both to see which one feels more comfortable for you, and then focus on studying for that one. Don't waste hours and hours of your time studying for the GMAT. If you feel like I'm just not increasing my score when I do these practice tests, try the GRE. It's okay.
Yeah, take the one on which you can do better.
Yeah.
Give yourself the best chance to showcase your ability, your aptitude, your preparation, all of these things. All of the schools now get enough of both of the exams where we can also calibrate and assess the score within its own test. We don't have to compare it across tests. We don't have to use the comparative tools. And so that means that we know what good performance on the GMAT looks like. We know what good performance on the GRE looks like. And so exactly what SOOJIN said, take the one where you feel best prepared to succeed.
Morgan, do you think one test is easier than another?
Well, never having taken the GRE, I can't speak from personal experience.
In fact, all three of you would have taken the GMAT to get into your MBA programs, because back then, the GRE wasn't a viable alternative, right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. No, I mean, I think I would just reiterate what both SOOJIN and Luke have said, which is whether or not one perceives one to be easier or harder, they're both perfectly legitimate for applying to business school. So I would say, again, do whichever one a candidate thinks is going to allow them to perform the best, and then move on. There are so many other elements of the application, and I think we focus so much on the test scores that I would just encourage people to get that out of the way so they can focus on everything else.
Right, absolutely. Letters of recommendation. Having read some of them that have been submitted to business schools, I'm often surprised at how honest some recommenders can be in a way that is hurtful to the candidate they're recommending. Do you see that as well, Luke?
Yeah, well, we see all manners of recommendation letters and reference letters. I usually tell candidates, you've got to select recommenders based on 3 criteria. Do they have the knowledge of your work? Do they have the desire to advocate for you? And thirdly, do they have the time to be able to write a good endorsement? So knowledge, I think, is self-explanatory. They have to know what you've done, how you've accomplished it, and be able to provide that detail. They have to want to advocate for you, the desire. And this sounds obvious, and yet I've talked with candidates who have overthought this and said, well, maybe I'll select somebody who actually doesn't really like me that much, or we don't have a good relationship, and won't it be bold for the school to see that I'm making this choice? No, don't do that.
No.
Choose somebody
It is
who
a bold
really,
choice.
it's a bold choice.
Bad choice.
You want somebody who's in your corner. But those first 2 things don't matter if the recommender is not going to be able to dedicate the time to be able to really articulate why he or she is enthusiastic and the content and the knowledge of what has happened. So those 3 things really are critical to be able to get a good reference and a good recommendation.
And a good recommendation comes from someone who knows you well, not someone who's famous or well-known or in the news, or maybe even alumni. Although, Luke, you have a different attitude about alumni recommendations, right?
Well, we care a lot at the Tuck School about our community, and we care what the community has to say about applicants. So when we hear endorsements from alumni, from students, from faculty, people who are connected with the community, we do pay particular attention to that, and I acknowledge that. And yet it also reframes our expectations for what we hope to see from the candidate.
Right.
And so if you have somebody from the community who is willing to advocate for you, to put their reputation on the line, we're going to expect you as a candidate to be able to live up to what may in fact be a higher standard. So you have to think very carefully as a candidate about the fact that yes, the Tuck School will pay particularly close attention to community references, community letters, and we're going to expect you to live up to it as a result.
Right. Well, SOOJIN, you would say, however, that knowing the person really well would probably trump whether or not you have a relationship with the school.
Absolutely, because we're looking for insight into how you interact with others in a professional setting. That's going to give us an idea of how you'll interact with your teammates in business school, how you might interact after school when you go out into the world again. So an alum may know you on a personal basis, but this is a professional school that you're going to go to.
Right.
So we want to know how you interact in different hierarchies, across teams, and what kind of actor are you?
Morgan, give me an example of a recommendation letter that surprised you recently.
Well, I think it gets to one of the things touched on earlier, which is that sometimes candidates may ask recommenders who haven't perhaps fulfilled the desire component of it, of what we're looking for. And so this past cycle, there's always a few where the recommender actually does not recommend the candidate for business school.
Ouch.
And or may flat out state something that they don't approve or believe in business school, or don't believe that this person should pursue an MBA. And I think, you know, it's unfortunate that that happens and that ultimately gets submitted to the admissions committee. Again, it calls into question self-awareness, judgment of the candidate. But I think, you know, all of that can be avoided if the candidate does his or her homework up front and makes sure to prepare their recommenders, right? And sits down and goes through recent performance evaluations, talks about business school, why they want to go, gives that recommender insight into what specifically they want to do. And I think, you know, if at some point you're going through that process and you get an inkling that your recommender is not quite on board with this, you know, it's okay to step back and say thanks but no thanks and look for someone else.
Right.
Because I think although many of us would prefer to have recommendations coming from current supervisors, I think it's more important to have somebody who has the time and the desire to write that recommendation that's going to support your application. So if necessary, to look elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah, I agree, Morgan. A good recommendation is just such a natural extension of a relationship that's already been built.
Yep.
And so if you already have a strong relationship with that supervisor or with whoever the advocate is, I think it's very naturally easy for you to then have the conversation about, let's talk about why this path. If you haven't invested in those relationships, then these are much more awkward, stilted conversations to say, we don't really know each other, but will you write this recommendation for me?
And you're more likely to get a surprise.
Exactly,
A
exactly.
surprise in a negative way.
And so the way that I encourage candidates think about the recommendation letter, if you're especially still looking way ahead to the MBA program, start investing in these relationships now.
Yep.
Don't wait until the last minute. Don't wait to ask until you're just getting ready to submit. But start investing in the relationships that will build you this network of advocates as early as you possibly can.
Great.
And a delicate way to ask it,
Yeah.
if you don't want to get a negative answer, is do you have the time to write a recommendation letter? It's not saying, would you write me a good one, or will you write one? It's hard to put someone in the position of saying, no, I don't want to write you one. But if it's around time, that's a less awkward way to say no.
That's true. And if I'm inclined not to recommend or to point out something that's negative about a candidate, that's an easy way out.
Exactly.
I don't have the time to do it.
Yeah,
And then I won't damage my
Right.
candidate.
right.
All right, we've got some good questions here from our live stream audience. So let me get into them. Here's the first one. What is one trait you look for during the interview? SOOJIN?
A trait. We know that candidates are going to be nervous oftentimes, and they're going to feel like they have to have certain answers prepped, and so they're going to be perhaps a little bit canned. But what we hope to find is that they feel like it's a conversation where we're getting to know each other. Again, the dating analogy.
Right.
So that we get a sense for what is this person like, and how might they interview in a job interview for an internship, for example. So we hope that we're getting the real them as opposed to the over-rehearsed, over-polished, canned them.
Right. I would have thought you looked for professional presence. No?
Was not one of the first things that came to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that came to your mind?
The first thing that came to my mind was demonstrating curiosity. So I think, and again, that sort of gets back to self-awareness, and I realize this is a common phrase here today. But I think curiosity about how they approach their world, how they approach their community, their job, the couple of years ahead. I think certainly, you know, candidates are coming into business school with a certain level of achievement and experience, but we're also looking to see demonstrated curiosity in terms of recognizing that they still have so much more to learn, right? And that they're going to be proactive about that. So that was the first thing that came to mind. But the second thing, SOOJIN, as you were talking, was folks who are interested in our programs. So we were talking yesterday about how many of our schools have actually removed the, you know, why Ross, why Tuck, or why Haas from the application itself because we felt like we were getting rehearsed answers. And let's be honest, it was taking up valuable essay space in terms of word count. But now, I think many of us, at least Haas, we ask that question in our interviews. Because if you make it to the interview stage, at that point, we're looking for you to demonstrate a little bit of knowledge and curiosity about our program, what you hope to get out of it, and what you're going to contribute. So I would say the interview is a great opportunity to do that.
Great. Luke, any advice for a reapplicant? That's another question from the audience.
I'm thinking back to what Morgan said a few questions ago about taking the advice. of the school. And so I know that many schools will either directly or somewhat indirectly actually give encouragement and advice to say this is how you might strengthen an application in a future year. If you're considering applying to a school that gives that feedback and that advice, listen and pay attention to it and follow it. Right? We've invested the time to be able to share that feedback with you, and we want to see you act upon it. So that's a big component of it. And then also reflection, thinking back on where did I show my areas for strength? Where did I show my areas for growth? What are the ways that I can sharpen this and tell the story of who I am and why the school is a right match for me? That reflection can go a long way, and that includes both individual reflection and also getting that core group around you of family, friends, mentors, whoever it may be, to help inform you and guide you and advise you on this is how you might better tell the story of who you are and what you will bring and contribute to the community.
Do you have to have something new to say about yourself when you reapply? You have to have had a promotion, a new assignment?
I would imagine if a year has passed since you've applied last, something new has happened in your life. You've had a new project. It doesn't have to have been a promotion. You might have a new test score. You might be involved in a new activity, find a new passion. So we do require one piece of new information in the form of a letter. Tell us what's happened in the last year and why you're still interested.
Good point. Okay, we've apparently received a lot of questions from the non-traditional MBA applicant who wonders how they can strengthen their application and make it competitive with people who have real business know-how and experience. Morgan, what do you say?
Well, I think that this gets back to one of the earlier questions about work experience and what is the preferred work experience coming into an MBA. And I think that the message that we all delivered loud and clear is that there really isn't a difference at this point between traditional and non-traditional candidates in terms of how we're evaluating people and what we're looking for. So, you know, this is sort of one of those trigger words for me, non-traditional, because at this point, there really is no traditional or non-traditional. I would potentially argue that some programs have more non-traditional applying to them than what we've considered in the past the traditional applicant. So, you know, I think that sometimes for these candidates, though, they do feel the need to artificially craft their application into a way that sounds more businessy or feels more formal. But, you know, I think the downside to that gets to what Luke was saying earlier, which is that then the application comes across flat. You don't really feel like you got to know the person because they were writing about something that wasn't true to who they were and their experiences. So, you know, my advice would be don't try and put a square peg into a round hole, just be you. Showcase your best experience, professional, personal, extracurricular, focusing on you, not on the person sitting next to you or the person, you know, across the room from you.
Yeah,
that's good stuff. I will just want to make one point that I think sometimes gets lost in all this. Outcomes do matter. Right? Results do matter. They matter on the test scores, which is why we ask for them. And yes, we take all these things into context and calibrate, but we would not ask applicants to take these exams if we didn't care how they did on them. That applies to the professional experience as well. Right? So outcomes matter, that you have had accomplishments and achievements relative to what you do. And so this is where I think of this non-traditional versus traditional, which I totally agree with Morgan. Like that, those lines have completely been broken down. But if you do something that is less represented in the business school application pool, we want to see that you've done it well. Right. And that you've had the behaviors underneath that drive the outcomes you've achieved. And we understand, based on the beautiful range of application profiles that we get, how to assess across different industries, different backgrounds, this kind of thing. So we do care about that piece. The other thing that I'll add is we want to see how you'll contribute your experience. And it's fine to come from some kind of work that may be less represented if you understand how that adds value to the community and you are willing and eager to contribute that experience and that perspective. That will elevate the discussions, that will elevate the rigor of the classroom and as well as outside of the classroom in terms of the richness of discussions that can be had with classmates, with faculty, with staff, with alums, and all of the members of the community.
And I just wanted to touch on, you were talking about outcomes, and it just got me thinking about actual outcomes of some of our non-traditional students. You know, I actually think that as I reflect on, you know, the graduating class right now, that some of the most successful students in their job search process have been ones who may have considered themselves non-traditional. So meaning, you know, as I think about, well, who are for example, the pool of graduates going into consulting, are going to work for some of the top tech firms. A lot of them are the students who came from teaching or social impact or nonprofit, right? Roles where perhaps they didn't have that opportunity to have demonstrated quant strength coming into business school, but had the curiosity, right? And the patience and the resilience, and are now seeing some very successful outcomes.
Good. Here's a question which is kind of interesting to me. If you are an MBA or an applicant who's actually wanting to leverage the MBA for career change, which, let's face it, is probably the majority of MBAs, do you evaluate that person differently in the application process than you would someone who wants to stay in his or her own industry?
Differently? No. We look at everybody the same. We want to know that you have thought about what you want the MBA for, you have an idea of what you want to do, how you will go about pursuing that, because recruiting starts really fast. Students come to campus, and within 2 weeks, recruiters are on campus, and you're having to develop your stories and your practice your interviews. So you have to come in with a pretty good idea of what you want to do.
Now, sometimes the goal can get in your way. I mean, if you want to become a private capitalist, PE person, private equity person, and you have no experience in finance, you know that that person's not going to be able to leverage the MBA to do that switch, right? So you might be more skeptical of a candidate who expresses a goal that doesn't line up to their past. Yes or no?
Yeah. Yes, we look for awareness. And to us, awareness is a balance of ambition and reality. And so we want candidates to be ambitious. We want candidates not to come to the MBA just to do the exact same thing that they were doing before at the same level in the same role. I had a mentor who used to tell me nobody changes the world through low ambition. Right? And so we do want people who aspire to great things, and yet what needs to come with that is a sense of reality. Right? What does the realistic path actually look like? And so if you are looking for an enormous jump in the career, we would like to see, one, that you know that this is an enormous jump, and two, that you understand that it may take several steps to get there, and it might not happen immediately coming out of the MBA, but that you have a realistic path and some real thoughtfulness and self-awareness about what are the ways that you can get there, and how can you build upon the experience that you're going to have in the MBA to be able to accelerate your path there. So we want that ambition, we want that realism, and we believe the best candidates can mix both.
Believe it or not, we're out of time.
Oh, darn.
So I think
That was quick.
I think the takeaway here is self-awareness is a term I heard over and over again throughout our discussion. Be ambitious, but in a way that's not only ambitious for yourself, but for others probably, because it's possible to be too ambitious for yourself and to make that not come off all that well, right? And do your homework, you know, talk to alumni, visit a school, know what you're getting into, know how the programs differ from each other, and maybe you'll find the right fit. SOOJIN, Luke, and Morgan, thank you so much for a terrific discussion. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants at the MBA Summit. We're coming up with our second panel right after this in a few minutes. Hope you join us.